In the Sledge, Leo Tolstoy, from his earlier writings, 1851. It was spring, the 25th of March. The night was clear and still. A young moon was visible from behind the red roof of a large white house opposite. Most of the snow was already gone. Only my night sledge was at the entrance, and even without the footman's shout of, "Let's go there!" Dmitri knew quite well that I was leaving. A smacking sound was audible, as though he were kissing someone in the dark, which, I conjectured, was intended to urge the little mare and the sledge away from the pavement stones on which the runners grated and screeched unpleasantly. Finally, the sledge drew up. The solicitous footman took me under the elbow and assisted me to my seat. If he had not held me, I should simply have jumped into the sledge. But as it was, in order not to offend him, I walked slowly and broke through the thin ice which covered the puddle, getting my feet wet. "Thank you, my friend." "Dmitri, is there a frost?" "Of course, sir. We have a bit of a frost every night now." "How stupid! Why did I ask that?" "No, there is nothing stupid about it. You wanted to talk, to enter into communication with someone, because you are in high spirits. And why am I in high spirits? Half an hour ago, if I had gotten into my sledge, I wouldn't have started to talk. Because you spoke elegantly when taking your leave, because her husband saw you to the door and said, 'When will we see you again?' Because as soon as the footman caught sight of you, he jumped up, and despite the fact that he reeked of parsley, he took pleasure in serving you. I gave him a 50 kopeck piece a few days ago. In all our recollections, the middle falls away, and the first and last impressions remain, especially the last. For this reason, there exists the splendid custom of the master of the house accompanying his guest to the door, where, twining one leg about the other, as a rule, the host must say something kind to his guest. Despite any intimacy of relations, this rule should not be disregarded. Thus, for example, "When will we see you again?" means nothing, but from vanity the guest involuntarily translates it as follows. "When" means, "Please make it soon." We means, not only myself, but my wife, who is also pleased to see you. "See you" means, "Give us the pleasure another time." "Again" means, "We have just spent the evening together, but with you it is impossible to be bored." And the guest carries away a pleasant impression. It is also necessary to give money to the servants, especially in homes that are not well regulated and where not all the footmen are courteous, in particular the doorman, who is the most important personage because of the first and last impression. They will greet you and see you off as if you were a member of the family, and you translate their complaisance, whose source is your 50 kopeck piece, as follows. "Everyone here loves you and honors you. Therefore, we try, in pleasing the masters, to please you. Perhaps it is only the footman who loves and honors you, but all the same it is pleasant. What's the harm if you are mistaken? If there were no mistakes, there would be no—" "Are you crazy? What the devil?" Dmitri and I were very quietly and modestly driving down one of the boulevards, keeping to the ice on the right-hand side, when suddenly some chowderhead, Dmitri gave him this name afterwards, in a carriage and pair ran into us. We separated, and only after we had gone on about 10 paces did Dmitri say, "Look at that, the chowderhead. He doesn't know his right hand from his left." Don't think that Dmitri was a timid man or slow to answer. No, on the contrary, although he was of small stature, clean-shaven, but with a moustache, he was deeply conscious of his own dignity and strictly fulfilled his duties. His weakness in this case was attributable to two circumstances. Dmitri was accustomed to driving vehicles which inspired respect, but now we were driving in a small sledge with very long shafts, pulled by a very small horse which he could hardly reach even with a whip. What is more, the horse dragged its hind feet pitifully, and all this could easily evoke the derision of bystanders. Consequently, this circumstance was all the more difficult for Dmitri and could quite destroy his feeling of self-confidence. Probably my question, "Is there a frost?" had reminded him of similar questions that I had asked him in the autumn on starting out to hunt. A hunter has something to daydream about, and he forgets to hurl a well-timed curse at the driver who does not keep to the right-hand side. With coachmen, as with everyone else, the one who shouts first and with the greatest assurance is right. There are certain exceptions. For example, a droshky driver cannot shout at a carriage. A singleton, even an elegant one, can hardly shout at a four-in-hand. But then everything depends on the nature of the individual circumstances, and most important, on the personality of the driver and the direction in which he is going. I once saw in Tula a striking example of the influence that one man can have on others through sheer audacity. Everyone was driving to the carnival. Sleighs with pairs, four-in-hands, carriages, trotters, silk cloaks, all drawn out in a line on the Kiev highway, and there were swarms of pedestrians. Suddenly, there was a shout from a side street. Hold back your horses! Out of the way there!" in a self-assured voice. Involuntarily, the pedestrians made way. The pairs and four-in-hands were reined in. And what do you think? A ragged cabby, brandishing the ends of the reins over his head, standing on a broken-down sledge drawn by a filthy jade, tore through with a shout to the other side before anyone realized what was happening. Even the policeman burst out laughing. Although Dmitri is a reckless fellow and loves to swear, he has a kind heart and spares his poor horse. He uses the whip not as an incentive but as a corrective. That is, he doesn't spur his horse on with the whip. This is incompatible with the dignity of a city driver, but if the trotter doesn't stand still at the entrance, he will give him one. I had occasion to observe this presently. Crossing from one street to another, our little horse was hardly able to drag us along, and I noticed from the desperate movements of Dmitri's back and hands, and from his clucking, that he was having difficulties. Would he use the whip? That was not his custom. But what if the horse stopped? That he would not tolerate, even though here he didn't need to fear the wag who would say, "Feeding time, eh?" Here was proof that Dmitri acted more from a consciousness of his duty than from vanity. I thought much more about the many and varied relations of drivers among themselves, of their intelligence, resourcefulness, and pride. I suppose that at large gatherings those who have been involved in collisions recognize one another and pass from hostile to peaceable relations. Everything in the world is interesting, especially the relationships which exist in classes other than our own. If the vehicles are going in the same direction, the disputes last longer. The one who was to blame attempts to drive the other away or to leave him behind, and the latter sometimes succeeds in proving to him the wrongness of his action and gains the upper hand. However, when they are driving on the same side, the odds are in favor of the one whose horses are more mettlesome. All of these relationships correspond very closely to the general relationships in life. The relationships of gentlemen among themselves and with their drivers in the case of such collisions are also interesting. "Hey there, you scoundrel! Where do you think you're going?" When this cry is addressed to the whole vehicle, the passenger involuntarily tries to assume a serious or gay or unconcerned expression in a word, one that he did not have before. It is evident that he would be pleased if the situation were reversed. I have noticed that gentlemen with moustaches are especially sensitive to the insults sustained by their vehicles. "Who goes there?" This shout came from a policeman who had in my presence been very much offended by a driver this same morning. At the entrance across from his sentry box, a carriage was standing. A splendid figure of a driver with a red beard, having tucked the reins under him and resting his elbows on his knees, was warming his back in the sun, with evident pleasure, for his eyes were almost completely closed. Opposite him, the policeman walked up and down on the platform in front of his sentry box, and using the end of his halberd, adjusted the plank which was laid across the puddles near his balcony. Suddenly, he seemed to resent the fact that the carriage was standing there, or else he began to envy the driver who was warming himself with such pleasure, or perhaps he merely wished to start a conversation. He walked the length of his little balcony, peered into the side street, and then thumped with his halberd on the plank. "Hey you! Where are you stopping? You're blocking the road." The driver unscrewed his left eye a little, glanced at the policeman, and closed it again. Get a move on. I'm talking to you. No attention. Are you deaf, eh? Move along, I said. The policeman, seeing that there was no response, walked the length of his little balcony, peered into the side street once more, and evidently was getting ready to say something devastating. At this point, the driver raised himself a little, adjusted the reins under him, and turning with sleepy eyes to the policeman said, What are you gaping at? They wouldn't even give you a gun, you simpleton, and still you go around yelling at people. Get out of here! The driver roused himself and got out of there. I looked at the policeman. He muttered something and looked angrily at me. Apparently he was embarrassed that I had overheard and was looking at him. I know of nothing that can offend a man more deeply than to give him to understand that you have noticed something but do not wish to mention it. As a result, I became embarrassed myself. I felt sorry for the policeman and went away. I love Dimitri's ability to give people names on the spur of the moment. It amuses me. Get along, little cap. Get along, monkey suit. Get along, whiskers. Get along, washerwoman. Get along, horse doctor. Get along, bigwig. Get along, monsieur. The Russian has an amazing ability to find the incisive epithet for a person he has never seen before, and not only for an individual, but for a whole social class. A member of the lower middle class is a cat dealer, because it is said they trade in cat skins. A footman is a lapper, a lickspittle, a peasant is Kurik. Why, I don't know, a driver is a wagon-eater, etc. It is impossible to list them all. If a Russian quarrels with someone whom he has just met, he immediately christens him with a name which goes straight to the most sensitive point. Crooked nose, cross-eyed devil, thick-lipped scoundrel, snub-nose. One must experience this himself to realize how accurately such epithets always hit the sorest spot. I shall never forget the insult which I once received behind my back. A Russian said of me, "Oh, he's a snaggle-toothed one." It should be known that my teeth are extremely bad, decayed and sparse.